My guest today is Dr. Chelsea Wakefield, Director of the Couples Center at UAMS in Little Rock, Arkansas. It was 2017 when the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences recruited Chelsea to come to Little Rock and establish a program designed to treat those with interpersonal relationship issues. Chelsea is a nationally recognized expert in the field of couples therapy and an author. Her mission to help couples navigate the unique challenges of relationships in the 21st century by providing counseling, group therapy, and community education about love, desire, relationships, and sex. The center also teaches her methodologies to other counselors so they can help their clients, thus sharing in the love. Dr. Wakefield holds a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in social work, and a diploma in clinical sexology. She has published 3 books, Negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty, In Search of Aphrodite, and more recently, The Labyrinth of Love, all of which are used by both clinical professionals and laypersons. To sum Chelsea up, she is a Jungian-oriented psychotherapist, couples therapist, dream worker, workshop and retreat leader who works with individuals, couples, and groups. It is with great pleasure we welcome to the table the extremely interesting and smart and deep thinker, Dr. Chelsea Wakefield.
Good to be here.
So, hey, Chelsea, you got here in 2017. Are you still at UAMS?
I am still at UAMS, and I'm primarily teaching at UAMS, the clinicians there. My private practice is currently over at Plaza West.
So you started a private practice?
Well, I was doing therapy and couples therapy at UAMS, but we just kind of regrouped everything. And about a year and a half ago, I lifted the couples therapy portion out of UAMS, and I'm now over at Plaza West.
Well, I think the last time I interviewed you was in 2018. We've come a long way in our radio show, haven't we?
Yes, you have.
Thank you. So I listened to the radio show before this show, and I was impressed with how good that show was. And I want to recommend to all of our listeners that if you're struggling with anything and you're kind of wanting to get back a part of your life, go listen to our 2018 show. It might strike a chord with you, and it might make you think about your own cast of characters, which we're going to learn about. And I know it did me. I'm going to go back and read one of your original books that I read for that show because it makes you identify your cast of characters, which I think we're going to do right now, and explain to our listeners what a cast of characters is.
Yes, and I'm remembering that interview that was focused on my book, Negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty, which is all about defining your inner cast of characters. And what we're basically talking about is the sub-personalities that live in us. That, we have different roles, we have different moods, we have different ways of being. So, for example, you might be in one mode. Years ago, I had an office in the back of my home, and I used to be in my therapist mode in my office. And my therapist mode is very soft-spoken, very compassionate. And then I would step over the threshold into my house and I'd say, Tommy, have you started your homework? So now I'm in mother mode. So that's the shifting of states in terms of the different selves that live in us. So we talked about that a lot. And in my latest book, The Labyrinth of Love, I look at how in a couple, there are 2 people, each with their inner cast of characters, and different parts of self interact with different parts of the other person. And some of them get along really well, and some of them don't get along quite as well. And so it's interesting to think about that in your relationship with anybody in your life.
Really, anybody. Mm-hmm. So when I listened to our past show, I realized that my inner critic, which was one of the cast of characters, was really being tough on myself. And I thought, I need to go find some peace with my inner critic. I'm never good enough. I'm never doing enough, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And I think we called them archetypes.
Yes.
And I never knew that people had so many archetypes inside of them until I read your book. And I related to 12 of them. The mother, the daughter, the wife, the inner critic, the accountant.
The entrepreneur.
The entrepreneur, yeah.
You also have a silly, fun self, too.
I do.
Who I totally enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
The rebel. There's the rebel.
Absolutely.
And it's funny, Gray, you'll like this. Matthew, my other son, your brother, was in this last meeting.
Oh, yeah. He was around during the last radio show.
And he was recording the audio. And we started talking about the rebel, and I said, "Oh, that's the one I relate to." And then Matthew was like, "Yeah, that's the one he relates to." And then all of a sudden, we decided that everybody that businesses also have archetypes and personalities, which I'd never thought of.
Oh, yeah.
You said that, Chelsea, and we decided that everybody works for Flag and Banner's a rebel.
Interesting. Fun.
Or silly.
Yeah, we all definitely have our archetypes. That's for sure.
All right. The Labyrinth of Love is your most recent book. How did it come about? And how long did it take to write it? And why is it important? This is your third book.
This is my third book. And it actually began with my editor for my second book, who said to me, let's lift out all the material about couples and just focus on women for that book. That was In Search of Aphrodite. So I'd been percolating on this book for quite a few years and just really distilling the concepts in it as I'm working with couples. Are
you saying that this book's all about women, or the Aphrodite book?
Aphrodite was all about women, but the suggestion was you have so much to say, we need to divide this into two books.
Okay, but the Labyrinth of Love is about a couple's relationship.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I've heard from people that have read it to say that everybody should read it just because it's about relationships. Mm-hmm. But it's specifically about love relationships and the journey of love and the inevitable quagmires that we find ourselves in and how we make our way out of them.
The labyrinth.
The labyrinth, yes.
You have 17 chapters in your book. Mm-hmm. That seems like a lot to talk about. But you have 3 parts, and I like the first one because everybody likes the first part. It's the falling in love. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about falling in love and the euphoria and what you say, the enchantment. Mm-hmm. You have the enchantment, the disenchantment, the attachment, the inner cast of characters that we just talked about, the swamplands of love, and the misbegotten solutions. What did you just do?
I love the swamplands of love.
Is that where you are?
I don't know, but I like it.
All right. Let's talk about the enchantment and how it changes you.
Yes. So I kind of hope that everyone has an opportunity to experience one of those enchantments, because it really is a lofty, expansive, amazing experience to be head over heels in love with somebody. And during that period of time, a couple of things are happening. First of all, there's something about the lock and key fit with certain people that we meet where there's just something about them that just seems to be what we've always longed for. It's like the missing piece. Or when we're with them, they evoke something out of us that it is sort of blossoms and comes into being. And we love that. And during that period of time, there's an enormous amount of dopamine that is being pumped.
Is that what it is?
So we're drunk on love.
Oh, love drunk.
We are love drunk.
That's addictive.
It can be very addictive for people who want to do that over and over. And you'll meet those people. They will get into a relationship and they'll stay there for about 1 or 2 years. And
they
then
like honeymoon phase.
They like the honeymoon phase.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that fades, they move on. They rinse and repeat. But they also
usually rinse and repeat.
Yes, it's like being in a washing machine. The problem is that they probably are repeating the drama as well.
Yeah,
because it is inevitable after that first phase of love, which Dorothy Tennov termed limerence. It's a pretty word, limerence.
What does that
mean?
That
sparkly. We can just talk into the night. We can't keep our hands off of each other. You're everything I've always longed for. And you're looking at me like I'm the most wonderful person in the world. And of course, I feel wonderful because you think I am. And I'm looking at you. I think you're the most wonderful person in the world. You feel, so we're all on our best behavior. And what happens over time is as the dopamine starts to fade and we become more familiar with what I call the rest of the cast, which is those other inner characters that live in us that we don't initially see when we're falling in love, then we get a little bit disenchanted. So that's actually when the real relationship starts. It's kind of like we've now taken a 360-degree walk around this person that we're so enamored of, enchanted by. And the enchantment is broken, and now we have reality. So now you have the raw materials of what you're actually going to really build a relationship with. And that's where the fun begins, the creativity begins, and the work begins.
You're calling the work fun?
Well, you know what? I hear you, Kerry. For a lot of people, see, then you have a fork in the road. You can either engage in a process of personal and interpersonal growth, or you can go into the struggle and anguish phase. A lot of people that I work with in couples therapy have gone into the struggle and anguish phase, and they're sitting on my couch in front saying, either we've fallen out of love, or we're living parallel lives, or we can't talk without arguing, all these kinds of things. Or there's been a betrayal and I don't, I have no idea who you are anymore. All these kinds of things that happen when people go into the wounding period.
So what's attachment?
So attachment.
That was the first 2 chapters.
Yes, attachment is really important to understand. It's a concept that was introduced many, many years ago by John Bowlby. And the way that he discovered this, the way it kind of came into being a whole concept is during the bomb droppings, during the Second World War, there was a movement called the Pied Piper movement, and they shipped all of the children out of London because bombs were being dropped on London. And if you ever have an opportunity, it'll break your heart to look at the pictures of these little children with their bundles and with their information paper clipped or stapled, or I guess they didn't have staples back then, but pinned onto them somehow so that people knew who they were and where they were going. And they were either sent out to camps, good camps.
Or their grandparents out.
Or grandparents and aunts and uncles out. And because they wanted that generation of children to live if all the parents were killed. It's like they didn't want the entire English population to be eliminated. What happened, though, is
That's called the Pied Piper?
It was called the Pied Piper
I never knew
movement.
that was the name of that. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
So what happened with those kids, it's something that were so little. There's pictures of like 5-year-olds holding the 2-year-old's hand. And they got onto these trains and they went out to safety, but they mourned the separation from their parents. And a lot of times, particularly if they were ill and they were in the hospital, they would call for their mothers, their fathers, mommy, mommy. And then no one would come. And they eventually settled down, and people thought that they had kind of come to terms with the separation. But what they'd actually done was letting go and mourning and saying, oh, I guess they're never coming back. I guess I'll never see my parents again. And now I'm all alone in the world and I've got to figure out how to navigate. Now, little ones didn't have that sophistication of thought, but they basically just kind of said, okay, they're gone. They're not coming back. I got to figure things out. And they just kind of got unto themselves. And then after the war was over, they were returned to their families, but they had a very difficult time rebonding with the families that they'd come from because they thought that they were all gone forever. And they had grieved it, let it go.
Yep.
And I think that part of the whole British stiff upper lip has to do with the toughness that this generation of children developed in grieving the loss of their parents and the separation. So when we talk about attachment in an adult relationship, we're talking about the bonds of connection that form over time with the people that we love. And those bonds have many strands, and they're built over time. They're like a rope that has many strands. And there are certain people in close relationships, kind of like the kids that came home, who are afraid of connecting and bonding. And we call those folks, they have an avoidant attachment pattern. And they're incredibly concerned about being overwhelmed by emotion or engulfed or controlled or subsumed in the other person's world. So they're very self-protected and they need a lot of space and a lot of alone time. Then there's the people who have an anxious attachment pattern and they need a lot of connection and a lot of reassurance.
For the same reasons?
It's both of them are insecure, But some people go to the, look, I'm obviously unto myself and life is up to me, so I'm not going to trust anyone ever again and be vulnerable ever again.
Do you think divorced children are like that?
They can be.
Children from divorced families?
Yes, they can be, but it's interesting that they also can go into the anxious, insecure category, where they're forever looking for someone that they can trust, but concerned that it's not going to work out.
You can never find somebody that you completely can trust.
Well, you know what's interesting about
those people cannot ever find anybody.
No, because they're always concerned that
it's an anxiety thing for them. So, I have noticed that my friends who come from broken families, a lot of them don't have a problem getting divorced. They're like, or
I lived through it.
That's what you expect. That's
relationships don't last.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen that in your practice, any? That there's a pattern, kind of.
Yes. People can also become anxious and insecure if they grow up in intact families where they're really not reflected and really not connected to in the ways in which they need. They can either get, either avoid and go to their rooms and read books and play with their toys and go online and their video games, or they can start searching for the love they never had. And again, anxiously, because they're kind of like, any day it might end.
Well, that chapter is mistitled. It says attachment when it should actually say detachment.
Well, okay.
I don't know.
Well, one's over-attaching and one's not. All right, the inner cast of characters we've already talked about. This is the one you like, Greg. And then we're going to go to. Then we're going to do these last two, and then we're going to go to a break. The Swamplands of Love.
Yes, the Swamplands.
What does that mean?
The Swamplands of love are the tactics and strategies that people use to try to get back to that early stage of limerence. They're trying to get back to that magical time. And they do all sorts of things. They complain. They just get involved. They nag. They criticize, they judge, they withdraw out of self-protection if they're, someone with a more avoidant pattern.
Is this the you never take me anywhere anymore kind of attitude? Okay.
Yes. You used to be wonderful. We used to have sex all the time. Yeah. Now we never have sex.
Yeah.
You obviously are not interested in me anymore. But with that kind of a tone.
Yeah, sure.
The Swamplands of Love answers a question that I had later in the podcast about why we're the meanest to the people we love the most.
Yes. We often, there's two reasons. Number one, if it's a super safe relationship and we feel kind of secure in the love, we can actually be our worst selves and they'll still stick around. And that's an awful thing because we should show up as our best selves with the people we love. But sometimes people are like, I can't do this at the office, but I can sure do it at home. So I can throw that 2-year-old hissy fit here.
Yes.
And the other thing is that
we're in the Swamplands. And we want to get back to where we were. And we nag them to get back there.
Yes. And we're vulnerable. So we're trying to do anything we can think of, and we're hurt and angry.
Last one in the part one, and then we're going on to a break. Misbegotten solutions.
Yes. And those are some of the strategies that I was just talking about, where the Swamplands are kind of a place of confusion.
And then the misbegotten solutions are where you make errors in trying to find those solutions.
You actually do things that only make matters worse.
Yeah, everybody does that. You work that way.
Yeah. We all fall guilty into that.
Yeah, we all do. All right. This is a great place to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Chelsea Wakefield, director of the no longer the director of the Couples Center at UIMS, teacher.
Yes. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at UAMS.
In Little Rock, Arkansas.
That's right.
Still to come. Is it possible to find the love that will last a lifetime? Why does passion fade? We kind of talked about that a little bit, but we're going to talk some more about it and how to solve it. And what does it mean to love, and what does it require of us? We'll be right back after the break.
Do you have something to say? Say it in flying colors. I'm Megan McCoy, and my family owns and operates flagandbanner.com. We believe that flags tell a story and banners make an impression. Whether it's for your business, organization, or special event, custom flags and banners will make your message soar. Visit flagandbanner.com for high-quality products and quick turnaround. We're not just any flag company. We're the experts that answer the phone.
We're speaking today with Dr. Chelsea Wakefield. She is the Associate Professor at the Department of Psychiatry at UAMS in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she is called the go-to couples therapist in Little Rock, Arkansas. Before the break, we talked about the first section of her book and the enchantment and the getting to know, the dopamine,
the limerence.
I love that word,
Yeah,
the limerence. And it's like a limerick, which is like a poem, and then the glimmer, which is from.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really nice word.
Limerence.
So we talked about that. And so if you're just tuning in, you might want to go back and listen to some of that. It was kind of fun to hear why we do some of the things we do. But now we're going to talk about why love is so important to humans. Love is so important. It is in every song. It's in every show. It's on your mind all the time. If you don't have it, you want it. If you have it, you're mad about it. So why is it so hard? Why does it cause so much suffering? And why are we so critical with the ones that we love the most?
Love, it can be very challenging, particularly when we enter that second phase. So we go from the enchantment to the disenchantment. And then we either go into that personal and interpersonal growth, or we go into the struggle and anguish. And the thing about that third phase is that it's just required of us.
What do you mean?
It is required when we get into an adult love relationship. We have to actually grow up.
It takes a lot of growth to stay in a relationship.
It sure does. And that's
See
why
her face. It sure does. How long have you been married, Chelsea?
33 years.
She knows.
I know.
She knows, yeah.
I know. We went through a stage in the middle that was not so easy.
Everybody does.
Everybody does. And, I remember thinking that this man was he was going to be the most wonderful man forever. Mm-hmm. And so I've been through every phase of that.
So I am one of the few people in my family who's divorced. People in my family, I don't know why they don't get divorced, but they don't. But I am. When do you know, I'm happily married now for 30-something years too, but when do you know it's time to call uncle? I mean, I knew it was time to call uncle with my husband because he made it so horrible, nobody could stay. Mm-hmm. I mean, he had substance abuse problems and all kinds of stuff. So you knew I can't stay. But what if it's not that kind of horrible? And I just want to tell everybody we're great friends now, and he's a great guy. But what if it's not too bad?
It's not so bad you want to go and not good enough to stay. It's sort of in that in between place.
How do you know when you should cut bait?
It's a really hard question. But what I encourage people to do is before they decide that the other person is such a problem, I can't stand you anymore, you need to do a little bit of inner work. Because a lot of what we project, and this is a really important word in relationships, is projection. A lot of the problems that start in relationships start over here in me, not over there with you. It's because my early wounding, my unrealistic expectations, my immature, self-oriented demands, my inability to actually think that you're a separate person with your own inner life and your own history, and that we have to be on the same page about everything. And, there's a lot of power struggles that get going in relationships. Mm-hmm. So
I literally had that conversation with my therapist last year. Like that mind shift to looking inward instead of outward is revelatory.
It is revelatory. So I call it begin within. Begin within.
Yeah, that's good. Begin within, Mom.
Are you writing that down for a tagline?
Probably should.
So, where's your pen?
Yeah, right.
So there's a really fancy term. I'll say it here and then I'll explain it. It's intersubjectivity. It's understanding that the people that we're with have a completely separate inner universe.
Right.
That they don't think the same way as we do. They don't feel the same way. They don't greet life the same way or handle their problems. They have different histories. They have different things that matter.
So how do you do it? How do you find all that out?
You activate one of the core love capacities. And so the whole center portion of the book is about the 6 love capacities.
6?
The 6 love capacities. So these are the 6 love capacities. They are commitment, courage, curiosity, good communication, compassion, and creativity.
You did that without looking at your book.
I did.
Yeah.
I'm reading it right.
I'm
reading it right down. So you listed chapter 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, but you skipped chapter 7, which is the Labyrinth, which is the title of your book.
Yes. And the reason that I call this the Labyrinth of Love is because I fell in love with labyrinths when I discovered the labyrinth in Chartres, France, in the cathedral there. And I started walking these labyrinths. There's a whole movement of walking labyrinths.
Oh, it's like a meditative practice,
yes,
right? Yeah.
It is. It's a walking meditation, but it's very powerful because there are no dead ends in a labyrinth. It's not a maze. And if you just keep walking, you will wind up in the center. So that in itself is a metaphor. If you just keep walking, just keep growing.
I didn't know that there was a difference between a maze and a labyrinth.
Yes, mazes have dead ends where
Right.
you bump into a wall and you have to turn around and go out.
Mazes are traps.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to start with solving the problem of whether you got to stay or whether you got to go. And you're going to do it by looking inside of yourself first. And we're going to start with the first one, commitment.
Okay.
I like organization.
Okay. So we're going to talk about whether to stay or go when we finish talking about the 6 love capacities.
Okay.
Because if we find, you were listing some things that can be pretty difficult to endure.
Substance abuse.
Violence.
Violence.
Infidelity. These are things that usually are oriented out of a person's character.
Gambling.
There's a number of addictions that can really destroy a relationship. Differences that's not the problem. Navigating differences. So we'll talk a little bit more about how you do that in the communication, the courage and the curiosity stage. So the commitment is to 3 things. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. They think they're committing to a person, but you're actually committing to a process. You're committing to the process of becoming a couple, which takes courage and curiosity and communication and compassion and creativity.
I'm blown away by that statement.
You're committing to a process, and you're also committing to staying present. So person, process, presence.
Yeah.
Presence means that I'm going to stay in the game with you regardless of how we're struggling. I'm not going to withdraw and just kind of stonewall and wall you out. I'm going to stay with you even though we're struggling. So person, process, presence. In order to do that, you have to have courage. That's the 2nd love capacity. And courage is built, it's kind of like going to the gym. You got to sort of exercise your courage. You have to sometimes start with little things and then you build up so that you get braver and braver. Revealing yourself in a relationship requires a lot of courage because once you reveal yourself, the person might say, oh, you're not who I thought you were, or I don't like that about you at all. So that's the differences thing. It takes a lot of courage to self-reveal.
And they never say that. You think they're going to say that.
They most often don't. Occasionally they do.
Yeah. I think by the time you get to that point,
if you
kind of hope that they wouldn't.
If you tell me you're a murderer, I'm like, okay, I'm out. But there's nothing else that you're going to tell me that I'm not going to go, well, we can figure that out.
Yeah.
Well, that's because that's the kind of person you are.
Yeah, that's true.
I think everybody's that way.
The word intrepid comes to mind when I think about you. It means that you're kind of fearless. You're like, we can figure this out.
Yeah. Mom is a problem solver.
I do love solving a good problem. I think that's why I've been married to 2 alcoholics. And dated a lot more.
Well, and there again, we kind of, there's something in the history that kind of.
It's not my family. My family were teetotalers.
Well, I'll tell you something about alcoholics.
Just fun.
They're fun and they're often very sensitive and they're often very deep in very endearing ways. And a lot of times they drink because they have all that sensitivity and they just have to numb
That's not my husband. He's not
He just likes to have fun.
He's just fun.
Okay.
He always feels bad when he goes to AA. He gets mad because I talk about him all the time. He goes to AA and he comes back and goes, I just wish I had a problem, but I didn't grow up with any family problems. I wish I had a problem. I got a car wreck. I just like to drink. It just runs in my family. Yeah. And when I have one, I just want another one, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Y'all are hilarious.
I know. All right.
That's a whole other thing we're going to unpack later. I like this courage thing, though, about the courage to do all the other things, because I think it's really easy to just get exhausted, never mind afraid, just,
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's, there's actually a section in my book where I talk about in the decision of whether to stay and whether to go, if one person does a lot of personal work and they're really developing into a really healthy adult, sometimes they can outgrow the relationship because if the other person refused to do any work, and that usually creates a lot of problems.
Yeah.
That's when you leave, when the other one won't do their work. You answered the question.
Yeah.
When I'm doing the work and I'm outgrowing you, I'm bored, I'm out.
Okay.
Because you're a ball and chain.
I think that one of the measures is, so there's a word called individuation,
okay,
which has to do with becoming the person you were born to be. That first book, Negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty, had a lot to do with individuation. And if you're living with someone who's actually inhibiting or preventing you from the growth that's inside of you that you know is inside of you, because they either have so many problems that you're so busy managing their problems that you can't grow, or they undermine you perpetually, or they've got some of those problems we listed earlier, alcoholism, violence, things of that sort, then sometimes people need to go. Sometimes relationships need to end.
And that's when you probably need an outside help from somebody to help you navigate those waters, because you're looking inside. And I know that I did this with all of my spouses. What is wrong with me that they keep wanting to run around and get drunk all the time? And so I never could get out of me doing the work and blaming myself for it. And then you get too deep in it, and then your thoughts get muddy.
Yep.
And then you can't make a decision. You're just in the swamplands.
You're in the swamplands.
Swamplands.
Yeah. You're lost in swamplands.
All right, let's move on to communication.
So
okay.
I want to clarify something that you said, because there's a difference between blaming yourself for the problems in the relationship and doing your inner work.
Oh.
So doing your inner work is really parsing out, what is my contribution to the difficulties here? How are my dance steps corresponding with the other person that is causing both of us trouble? And you stop doing those things that are generating from over here in me that are contributing to the problem. And so you're changing the dance steps. That is different than saying, that's where the compassion piece comes in, because you have to self-compassion.
And you have to have compassion for the other person who's not willing to change.
You do.
I've always been able, I keep talking about myself.
Yeah, you better slow down, cowboy.
No. But I've always had compassion for the other person. I don't ever think they want to be bad.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody wants to be bad, do they?
And, well, not really, but I think we fall into defensive behaviors that sometimes look bad because we don't know any other way of being.
All right. Communication is one of the, after you've become curious.
Well, the curiosity piece is huge. Getting curious in both directions. It's like, what's going on with me that I'm getting so upset about this? Why does it matter so much to me? Whatever the problem is. And I like to move the problem out so that the problem is the problem, not the person. I think that helps a lot in relationships. It's like the two of you sitting on the same side of the table and saying, we have this problem. Let's figure out together what we're going to do about this problem, rather than you're the problem. If you were different, we would be okay. If you would stop doing this or start doing that, we would be okay.
That's the nagging.
And what John Gottman calls criticism, which is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Oh, yes.
Which is criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That'll do it in.
4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. Yeah. I love that.
Y'all are on the same page.
I'm eating this up.
Well, you're young. You're 30. How old are you?
36.
He's at that right age
Well,
for
and
figuring this out.
well,
You're in a
and,
growth mode,
You know,
too.
it's funny. People my age and younger, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. There's a lot of this like psychology vocabulary that floats around on the internet now, particularly on social media, which is problematic. But there's a lot of these words you're saying now that I'm going, oh, I've heard that word before, I feel like there is a generational thing where you can allow yourself to connect with some of these concepts because they're just talked about more,
I think that's true.
Yeah.
So you've made the commitment to the person, process, and the presence. You had the courage to do what?
To stay the course.
You've got curiosity to dig down into yourself.
And what's going on with me and what's going on with you before I get... So Ellen Bader has this great little phrase. She calls it, be curious, not furious.
Good.
Curious, not furious. So I just think there's so much wisdom in that little pithy
Absolutely.
phrase. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then becomes the communication.
Yes.
So is this between you and your loved one?
Yes. And it's also between you and yourself. Because if you're being curious about like what's going on with me, and if you know you have an inner cast of characters, you can have a conversation with, let's say that I've got a scared little girl in me whose father drove off and never came back when I was 5 years old. And now I have this fear of abandonment in me. This wasn't my story, but I see this a lot. And so I need to be dialoguing with that little inner kid when she gets rocking and rolling and feeling pretty strongly and pretty scared about, I got this. I'm an adult. I know what to do. You don't have to worry. We can manage this.
She's done the work.
Yeah. When you do the adult work, because we can't go back and fix difficult childhoods, but we can develop healthy adults. We can develop as healthy adults.
You're too busy to ever take on a new client, and a lot of people can't afford counseling. How do they navigate? Do they buy your book?
I think buying this book and having some conversations with the partner, people have done that. They've actually done that before they've actually gotten on my waiting list to come work with me.
And one of your books is a workbook.
Negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty is somewhat of a workbook, but this is too. There are questions in every chapter that you can go through and ask yourself, do some self-reflection and some learning.
Compassion, we talked about that.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about communication.
Okay.
Because again, in this chapter, I go through the reporter's list of the who, what, when, why, where, how. And so if we think about who in me is communicating? Is it my rebel? Is it my scared little kid? Is it my healthy adult? Is it my seductress? Like, who's talking? And what is it that I'm actually trying to accomplish here? What do I want to say? What is it before I start yakking away or criticizing or complaining or crying or doing whatever it is that we do in those misbegotten solutions? What is it that I'm trying to achieve here? What's my outcome? And, so there's the who, what, where, there's places to have conversations and there's places not to. And there's also the timing. When? A lot of the couples that I work with have conversations as they're getting ready for bed. Actually, they have arguments.
Yeah. I was going to say the when and the where is the hardest thing that I deal with. Definitely, like by a long shot. Never, no time ever seems like a good time. So it just never happens, And so is that just different for everybody? Is it like best when you wake up in the morning and you're refreshed, or like over your first cup of coffee, or like?
I think that when people get good at addressing issues, the when is less daunting.
That makes sense.
Because if you know that this is going to be a horrible blow up, like all the last ones, you don't want to do it ever.
Yeah. Right.
You're going to avoid it.
Yeah.
So if one person is having some sort of an issue and they own it for themselves, like I'm speaking for myself, and I have a couple different protocols in the book, and one of them was developed by Polly Young Eisendrath a long, long time ago. And it's speak for yourself, listen mindfully. So in other words, I'm going to say, for me, this is a problem. And this is why it's a problem. This is how it's impacting me. Not you're a jerk and you need to stop doing this.
Never start a sentence with you.
Yes. If you can start all of your sentences with, this is what's happening for me.
This is how I feel.
This is how I feel.
It may not be valid, but this is how I feel.
Well, the thing about this is how I feel is it might be based on a misconception or a misunderstanding, but unless you describe what it is that you're understanding, the other person doesn't know what the misunderstanding is. So you have to start there. And the other person needs to be able to listen patiently and deeply enough so they really understand what the issue is. And then the premise is, this is not an edict. If I tell you I have a problem with, I don't know, the way that you leave, the way that you put the
dishes in the dishwasher.
There you go. There's a good one. There's a good one. Lots of people argue about that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Then that's actually my problem. Now we can talk about it, and you can say, oh, okay, well, how do you prefer to have them loaded? Or you can say, well, then you can load the dishwasher, which is unfortunately one of the ways of solving a problem. If it's a problem for me and not for you, then maybe it's my problem. Yeah. But then talking about possible solutions, I think people should never start a complaint without a suggestion for what they think would solve it.
This is a scientific approach. This is the way you do everything. You start with, what are you trying to get out of it? And too many people just start with, these are some things we're going to do, and they haven't identified what the goal is. So identify what the goal is, and then work backwards from that with a hypothesis. And you can ask your partner to help you. Very few people will turn you down if you ask for help. I feel like this. I don't know if it's valid or not, but can you help me define why I feel this way?
Yeah. Or do you have any thoughts about how we could do this differently? Yeah. So then you get into a solution-oriented conversation and a learning conversation, not an argument. So if you turn every conversation into a learning conversation and a solution, then you're managing yourself. You've got good emotional regulation. You're kind of anchored over here. It causes the other person to calm down, because if they know you're not blasting them,
accusatory,
and blaming them and shaming them, then they can relax. And, so the problem is the problem, not the person. Let's talk about this. Could we talk about this? So when you get in the habit of being able to have those kinds of conversations, it becomes much easier to engage the partner in a future conversation.
There's the part we're talking about, growth.
Yes.
To stay in a relationship takes growth on both sides. All right. The last one,
I think
creativity.
We didn't finish our who, what, when, where.
Oh, we didn't?
Why and how?
And we kind of covered how.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, sure.
How. Okay. Compassion and creativity, the last ones. So to get creative.
So compassion, what's really interesting about compassion is Kristen Neff is a researcher. She's devoted her entire career to studying compassion. And what she's found is that people who have compassion for themselves actually are more accountable. They're more accountable. Which
seems backwards.
Doesn't it seem backwards? Like if I have more compassion, but it's different than giving myself a pass and saying, well, I'm this way because I had a terrible childhood. It's sort of like, yeah, I can have compassion for the little kid inside of me that is still in me and wounded. However, I'm an adult now. So I need to do my personal work so I can show up in the relationship like a healthy adult and be worth relating to. And then I can, if occasionally I fall back, I can have compassion for that. I can have compassion for you because I know that none of us gets out of childhood alive. We all have our wounds. So I can learn a little bit more about, sometimes people wander through relationships. It's kind of like you hit a landmine. It's like, whoo, what just happened?
What's your wound?
What's my wound?
From childhood. Has anybody ever asked you that?
No, no one's ever asked me that. Something I delve in. I'll tell you something that I just recently discovered, though, because I'm a super high achiever and a really hard worker.
Yeah, 3 books, I would say so.
And I just started to really delve into what's driving that, because I would like to have a little bit more being time, a little bit more rest, a little bit more fun, a little bit more just being in the kitchen making soup. So, why is it that when I'm in the kitchen chopping vegetables and making soup, I feel a little anxious, like I should be getting something done? So I've been looking at that.
You think business is creative?
I do. It can be.
You think it's your creative outlet? You think writing books and helping people is your creative outlet?
I love writing books because it really helps me distill my thoughts, and it also is a way of helping other people. But here's the thing, is that I have kind of an intergenerational inheritance of the must.
What's that mean?
To whom much is given, much is expected. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, if you've got gifts to give the world, you better get out there and give them. Mm-hmm. You better give of yourself. You be of service.
I wondered why when I Googled you this past week and looked at it, you are all over. I couldn't even decide which site to click on. And I thought, why is she working so hard on so many different things? Podcasts, books, weekend adventures, a private practice, teaching at the college. I thought, you're not making money at most of that. You're just doing it. Happen to be an entrepreneur. I know you're not making money at most of that stuff. You're just spending time helping other people. And I thought, why are you so motivated to do that?
Well, that's one of the things I've been looking at. And it's an inheritance from my family lineage.
Was your daddy a doctor?
No, my father had a lot of problems.
Oh, let's unpack that.
He was a failed entrepreneur who was married to my very stable teacher mother.
Oh, there's the teacher.
Yeah. So I definitely have a lot of archetype of the teacher in me.
Did you tell me that he went to his priest for help?
Well, that's a whole other story because we
don't go to your priest for help.
Well, no, I'm not saying that, but so I have a master's degree and a PhD, and my master's thesis was on clergy as a community mental health resource, and what a terrible job they often do.
Yeah,
because when my father had a post-heart attack depression, which is not uncommon for men who have heart attacks.
That's right.
Yeah, he went to his priest.
He went to his minister, actually, because he was not Episcopalian or Catholic all the rest of us. And so and the minister said to him, I think you have unconfessed sin in your life.
Oh, boy.
And so he went home and combed through everything he could figure out, and he was still depressed.
Yeah.
And what actually ended up happening is after a year of sitting in a chair being depressed, he walked out on the marriage, and the marriage ended, and then he really spun. So I spent...
Did he end up killing himself?
He did not kill himself, but he sure went through a lot of women.
Oh, he's in the, what's that stage called?
He's
in the enchantment stage.
My father was very charming. And women loved him.
Well, there you go.
And, so he always could find a port in the storm.
A port in the storm. There's a lot of women out there like me who want to fix them. All right. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Chelsea Wakefield. We got one more section, I think, and she is the associate professor at the Department of Psychiatry at UAMS in Little Rock, Arkansas. Her mission, if you haven't figured out, is to help couples navigate the unique challenges of relationships in the 21st century by providing counseling, group therapy, and community education about love, desire, relationships, and sex. I'd love to talk about sex today, but that's not what we're going to talk about. We talked about that on our last show, though.
We did, and they can listen to that episode.
Can.
Go back to the 2018 interview.
There you go. We'll be right back.
Warm weather is just around the corner, and flagandbanner.com has floral and fun decor to help you spring into the season. For banners, door hangers, and more, come see us in our historic downtown showroom or shop online at flagandbanner.com.
We're speaking today with Dr. Chelsea Wakefield, the go-to couples therapist in Little Rock, Arkansas, a nationally recognized expert in the field of couples therapy and director of the Couples Center, well, not director, associate professor, Department of Psychiatry at UAMS in Little Rock, Arkansas. It was the Couples Center that she was originally hired for at UAMS to start a program, and she's done a wonderful job. If you're just tuning in, we've talked about the enchantment, then we've falling in love, then we've talked about the commitment and the work that needs to be done and figuring out your archetypes. Have I asked you, is there such a thing as a soulmate?
Oh, I love that question. And that's such a popular idea nowadays. I'm looking for my soulmate. So I don't actually believe in soulmates.
I was going to say, is that still really popular?
A lot of people, well, young people are so disenchanted by the idea that you could ever find a soulmate that they've kind of stopped looking. But
they don't even get married anymore.
I know.
Statistically,
Yeah. They just don't want to repeat their parents' relationships. Which
there we go. The wounded child.
Yeah, I can understand. Most people don't want to repeat their parents' marriages. Mm-hmm. I don't even want to repeat my parents' marriages while they were married for their 29 years.
Mm-hmm.
Soulmates, yes. So I think we can become soulmates. I don't think we find a soulmate. So I think when people... So there was a philosopher by the name of Martin Buber, B-U-B-E-R. He was an Austrian philosopher, and he talked about something called the I-thou relationship rather than the I-it relationship. So if you think about that, an I-it relationship is transactional. It means I'm doing this for you with an expectation you'll do this for me. And I want you to be who I want you to be because I've got my boxes and you're not checking them. So you better get busy. So that's that power struggle that we get into when we want others to be different so we can be okay. Mm-hmm. That's an I-it relationship. An I-thou relationship means I actually want to understand who you are so deeply that you might even think of it at a soul level. So if I am really curious about who you are over there, apart from what I want you to be, I'm going to cross the bridge into your world with honoring curiosity, true, authentic curiosity, good communications, deep listening, and compassion. So I'm not going to judge you when I learn things about you. And in the process of doing that, people have a kind of encounter that is almost magical. It's so amazing to see this. And I do see it in my office occasionally when I see two people. It's almost as if they forget I'm in the room and they start to talk to each other and everything just fades and they're discovering things and they're learning and they're feeling met. And it is the most beautiful thing.
Do you just love it when that happens?
I do. It makes my work so worthwhile. Yeah. It makes all the struggle that I sit with them because I sit with people who are struggling a lot.
Nobody listens anymore.
No.
I didn't realize that I didn't listen until in 2016 when I started this radio show. And I talked over everybody that came on the radio. And I realized I want to hear myself talk. I'm either talking or waiting to talk. Nobody listens.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the major, it would be the magic key for our society right now is to actually listen deeply to who other people are and what it is that they want, what they're concerned about.
You talked about this a little bit already. The baggage we bring to a marriage spills over and into the spaces in between us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Inevitably, because when you bond your life with another intimate partner, they become the most important person in the world. They become your primary attachment figure, and it evokes a lot of vulnerability. And it also stirs up a lot of stuff that's been kind of lying dormant since you were a little kid. You don't feel it till you're with this person so vulnerable. And it causes you to say things like, this only happens with you. Mm-hmm. I don't have this problem with my people that I work with. I don't even have this problem with my friends. It only happens with you. It must be you. You must be the problem.
Well, that is a common denominator sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it sometimes is yourself. If you find it happens with a lot of different people, though, not just with one person, but
yes,
if you find that you're in the same situation with a lot of different people, then you're like, okay, it must be me, which brings up some issues. Does everybody have the same issues? Money, fidelity, bad habits, sex, communication, and old wounds. Are those all the same repetitive problems that you see every time you counsel someone?
We have to add in-laws.
What'd you say?
We have to add in-laws to that.
Oh, in-laws.
Like extended, or outlaws, as sometimes they're called.
Outlaws.
Yeah,
sure.
and children. Children are complicating to relationships because the whole. Well, if you marry one, or if you
if you marry somebody who's got children,
and just different ideas about how to raise children. That's huge arguments about discipline and private versus public school and bedtimes. And
I actually know someone that got divorced over their children.
Yeah.
Their children, and how to.
I mean, that makes sense because I think we started this interview and you said something like, who are you? I don't know who you are anymore. And like that can bring, talking about the way you bring up your children is some of the deepest moral stuff that you have, is trying to figure out what kind of people you want them to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's some of your quotes that I liked. To love deeply requires an open heart. It's so nice. Love requires us to grow. You don't know what you don't know. That was from our first interview, which I think this book will help you find out what you don't know. And love is one of our greatest challenges. And it's something we all want. And so many of us push it away over and over again for a multitude of different kinds of reasons and fears, which could be old wounds.
And also lack of skills, because once you learn, I'm going to call it a protocol for how to talk to people, how to address conflict, how to figure out, like, why does this matter to me? Even just asking that question. What's the root system if I'm really worked up about something? What's the history around this that is causing me to be so upset?
So you have I want to tell our listeners, you have an Apple podcast, and it goes from chapter 1 to chapter 11, but this is 17 chapters in this book. And right now it's at chapter 11, and it's called Heartside Chats. And you and your girlfriend get into this podcast and you beat up each chapter a long time, actually.
Yes. It kind of goes on and on.
That's how you really feel, Mom.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, I could do a better job than that.
Come on back, Chelsea. We'll talk about the book some more.
No, really. It is good for people like me that that like a book on tape or that want to listen to a podcast while they walk. It's a great way to get this book, The Labyrinth of Love, and get it on Apple's podcast and listen to you talk just like you are now, because you're so wise. You do beat a dead horse for a little while sometimes, but that's okay. That's okay. Really, that's okay. Other people will hear stuff and go, oh, yeah.
You're just extremely bright, Kerry. You catch on fast.
See, look, she's still complimenting you after you told her her podcast was boring. You're the nicest guest we've ever had. Yeah.
No. I'll be starting up again.
Okay. And
so what we tell ourselves all the time about this podcast is that we all have our favorite episodes. It's all somebody's opinion, and every single one of ours is different.
The same.
They're never the same.
The ones that I love, you guys they'll be like, that was a sleeper.
Oh, yeah.
It's like cooking. No matter what you cook, somebody will like it.
Oh, yeah.
You may think it's too salty or has too much garlic.
Absolutely.
Somebody else like, that is so good. All right. This is a great place to take a break. When we come back, we're going to do our last segment with Dr. Chelsea Wakefield, Associate Professor at the Department of Psychiatry at UAMS. We're going to go over her Part 3 chapter and go over the last 4 chapters, 14. We're going to go over her Part 3 section and go over the last 4 chapters. We'll be right back. We're speaking today with Dr. Chelsea Wakefield, who is also known as the go-to couples therapist in Little Rock, Arkansas. But if you want to get in to see her, you better get on the list, sister. So you can go listen to our old podcast in 2018. We talk about sex, your archetypes inside of yourself. She's got 3 books she's written. You can do a lot of work at home on yourself. She's got a podcast you can go and do, or go and listen to while you're walking around the neighborhood, or running on the treadmill. But now we're going to talk about the labyrinth of sexuality, my favorite subject. Talk about it. Don't be scared. So you talk about this all the time. You do. Embarrass me, actually. That's hard to do.
Okay. Well, people get into a lot of trouble around sex.
Yeah.
And couples find it really hard to do two things, three, figure out who they are as a sexual being, communicate that to a partner. And the process of self-revealing requires a lot of courage.
I'll say.
Yeah. So, and then, the idea that if somebody reveals something about their sexuality to you and it's a little different than you, that can be a very challenging moment for both people, because the person who just revealed it, it's like, now the cat's out of the bag and I don't know what to do. I wish I hadn't said that. And the other person might be like, oh, I had no idea you were into that.
You're a perv.
Yeah, you're a pervert, or exactly. Something like that.
Well, you did talk about that in the earlier section about how sometimes when you're really, really honest, people doesn't always go well.
Everybody has an arousal template. And a lot of times the scripts that we have in our heads about like how sex should go and what actually causes our bodies to respond are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
The thing about sex is that you've got to actually pay attention to how your body responds. Rather
Not
than
just do the things that you think you're supposed to be doing when it's time to have sex.
Well, women are sexual pleasers.
That is so true. And it is one of the problems with female sexuality. And it's where women get into trouble, where they lose interest in sex. Because if you're just trying to be who the other person wants you to be, you're not discovering who you are. And if you're just doing what the other person wants you to do, you're not really thinking about, are we co-creating a relationship, a sexual relationship that we both want to participate in? And that takes a lot of communication and self-discovery and courage and curiosity and compassion and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
How did you decide to get into sexology?
Well, so the truth is that I've been interested in sex for a long time.
Did you have a lot of boyfriends in college?
Kerry and McCoy, we are not going to talk about all that. Not on the radio.
So, yes.
No, I was raised in a very conservative religious environment. And we had
Those girls are the worst.
Quit, Mom.
And we spent about, I don't know how many months it was studying about the evils of sex. And the more they talked about it, I was like, this is just making me more and more curious.
You're right. Like every kid, of course.
It's like, if this, good grief, what is it that they're forbidding us to do? So I did not start my sexual exploration until I was in college. And I did have a couple of boyfriends, and I got off to a good start. And I did not have any sexual trauma in my childhood other than church. And
church?
Well, all the teachings about, the dangers of sex.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The sin of it all.
And the sin of it all, and how it was just this horrible thing. So if you don't have a history of sexual trauma, and if you have a good introduction with a first sexual partner that is positive, a lot of stuff takes care of itself just by those two things.
That's right. But 1 in 3 little girls has got a problem.
Yes.
Bizarre.
1 in 3 women have experienced some kind of touching or talking or interaction with someone that they did not want and that was confusing or disturbing. And it can run the range from, they're doing the dishes and their uncle's just kind of looking at them up and down their body and they feel kind of slimed. Or it can be over touching, where someone sneaks into their bedroom at night and forces them to engage.
Sexual trauma, yeah.
Yeah, real overt.
So what's the statistics for little boys?
We don't really know, but it's somewhere around 1 in 5.
It's high also.
It's high. Oftentimes, it's framed differently for little boys. It's kind of like, oh, little boys, they're sexually curious and boys
will be boys. Yeah.
So, but there's a lot of things that go on. Even, I remember I was working with a client years ago that was a man that had been, his babysitter was giving him oral sex when he was like 7 years old because she was curious about it. And, he did not frame that as traumatic, but it was very kind of distressing and confusing for him growing up. Of course it was.
And now he's oversexed.
Well, that can lead to a lot of different problems with people.
So sexuality,
But what I really like to emphasize
it's the labyrinth of sexuality.
Is healthy sexuality. It's the idea that even if we have histories that are difficult, we can become a sexual healing team. We can replace talk, timing, touch, experiences that were really harmful and overwhelming with experiences that are pleasurable and consensual and gentle and playful and not so serious. And where we're really encountering each other, again, as if we both each exist. Neither one of us is, a player on the other person's stage.
You talked about pornography as a way to learn sex education today, that pornography is a big part of sex education, and it's not real, and it's harmful to these children.
What I talked about is that pornography is terrible sex education.
And there's too much of it, too accessible.
Unfortunately, we're not countering that education with good education. So when my son was in high school, the sex education that he got in school was basically abstinence, and these are all the diseases you're going to catch if you have sex.
That's what I got.
Yeah, that's a typical typical sex education. And what he got at home was his father and I sitting down and saying, sex is a really important part of life. It's really powerful. Very powerful feelings can get stirred up. You have to be responsible. So the person and the timing and the place and the way that the two of you talk about these things is really important. You should never feel pressured to have sex before you feel ready. And the two of you need to talk about things because people can get pregnant, people can get their hearts broken, and it might be you. So, this is a powerful and wonderful thing, and approach it with some reverence and maturity.
I told all of my children they could not have a boyfriend or girlfriend till they were 17. I just said, you can't go on a date till you're 17. Of course, they snuck around and did it if they wanted to. Some of them didn't. It was a great out for if you didn't want to. But if they did, they were a little more cautious about it.
I don't remember this rule.
You don't? You don't? That's because you were the one sneaking around.
I guess so. Yeah. I definitely didn't follow it if the rule was there.
No, you did not. Okay, so next is, and then I think there's body images.
Oh, yeah.
And one lady told me this one time after having my last baby, and I'm in my 40s, and I'm in there trying to find some nice lingerie to try to make myself feel good. And I'm just so disappointed, and the lights are terrible in Victoria's Secrets and dressing room. And the lady said to me, I was complaining, and it was an older woman. She said, honey, if you're the only naked woman in the room, you're beautiful.
I love that.
And I was like, you're right.
I forgot about that.
There really is no body image when you're in love and you're making love.
And when you're with someone who's making love to you.
That's right.
And one of the most wonderful things my husband ever said to me as I crested 50 was, I love your body because you're in it.
Oh,
in other words, it's so, if you're with a human who values you as a person, they're not as preoccupied with your stretch marks and cellulite and whether you have a few extra pounds on you and things of that sort.
I know. I think women and men both need to get over their, because you're with people you love. All right. The next one, faithfulness and fidelity. I don't know what to say about that.
Well, it's something that most couples don't really clearly define. Like what feels unfaithful to me and what feels faithful. They don't actually talk about it. And then they end up wandering into situations where one of them does something that really feels like a betrayal to the other person, which might, by the way, also include things like spending a certain amount of money on something without checking with the partner or quitting one's job.
It doesn't have to be sex.
It doesn't have to just be sex. It can be, honey, I just quit my job. I just decided I don't want to do that anymore, without talking about how we're going to navigate. It can be getting pregnant with another child when the other partner has clearly said, I really can't deal with another child, but unilaterally just getting pregnant, that's a betrayal on purpose.
Sure.
These things happen, of course, by accident, but I'm talking about people that I've known that have done that on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so there's a lot of different betrayals. So when we're talking about sexual fidelity, and of course, I have to acknowledge that we're in an era where there's a lot of conversation about open relationships and polyamory.
What's polyamory?
Well, polyamory has to do with being in multiple relationships at the same time, openly.
That's just a bad boy.
Sometimes it's women who want to do this.
What?
But what I say to couples that are in my office that want to do this is, let's have you two learn how to have one relationship. And then if you decide you want to have more than one relationships, you can do that without blowing everything out.
Does it ever work?
It does work in certain instances. But I think mostly what people are doing is they're trying to solve problems that they're having in the primary relationship, or they maybe have an avoidant attachment pattern, or where they don't really want to commit and go deep with one person. It just feels better to have their eggs in more baskets, so to speak.
Back to that very first chapter of, your wounding where you got attachment problems.
And I actually have known some individuals and some groups and couples.
I have too.
That are in these kinds of arrangements that actually works well.
How long have they been in that arrangement?
Well, 20 years.
Oh.
Yeah.
How about you, Gray?
5, 6. Yeah. And they're all young, so they can't have been in it for 20 years.
Well, and I know some folks that are much older than that are like 50 that have been 60 that have been in those kinds of relationships.
You're totally right about the way that you use it. It's not a tool to fix other problems. It's an extension out of an already healthy relationship, or at least in my experience.
Or it's an acknowledgement of a dimension of the personality that is not being met, or the dimension of the sexuality that's not being met by the partner. And they say, I want you to be fulfilled and happy.
Right. And again, this comes out of like a good communication that has, or good courage and communication and creativity. Yeah,
exactly.
All those
stuff. And this is, a highly controversial topic that we're talking about.
It could be economic too.
It can be
Pretty people in the home
young
is a
people,
lot better.
I know a lot of people that joke about that, actually, that are my age. 3 incomes are better than 2.
Yeah, you get extra money in the house.
Well, and divorce is expensive.
Absolutely.
So if you want to co-parent, but you don't want to have a sexual relationship anymore.
Let's talk about divorce and how expensive it is. It is cheaper to come see you.
It's really cheaper. It's not, and we're not just talking about the money. We're talking about the toll that it takes. We're talking about how when you get divorced, you split up friends. I mean, it's like this group of friends goes with you and this group of friends goes with me, and this one's on your side and this one's on my side. And now, in a contentious divorce, we're talking about the toll that it takes on children, which is immense in a contentious divorce. And I just am so frustrated by people who are so immature and so selfish that they carry on the war for years and years and years after the divorce, and the children are in the middle and they don't know what to do and they're torn. It's a terrible thing.
I am so frustrated with that too. Is it a wounding from that person from their youth or something that they've got to be so disagreeable?
Usually, yeah. Or it's, one person was completely invested in kind of like a fairy tale ideal of what they were getting involved in. And then when the other person fails to live up to their fairy tale, they're enraged. So, they'll just spend the rest of their lives talking about what a horrible person that person is.
And it only hurts them.
It hurts everybody. Yeah.
Impersonal dreaming. What's that?
So I think it's very important for couples to dream together and have the question. This is the creativity. It's like, who do we want to be in this relationship? What do we want to co-create over the course of our being together over a number of years that we can do together that we couldn't do separately? What experiences do we want to have? But most particularly, how do we want to show up? Who do we want to be? And so when we talk about intimacy is achieved by really looking deeply into the soul of the other, and by sharing that, and by being a deep listener who is willing to actually meet you as you are rather than who I would like you to be. And then the two of us meet each other, and that's a very special experience, that encounter. And then dreaming together is, the creativity, but it's also It's really interesting to me when couples start to share their nighttime dreams. It's a way of getting into the inner world of the other, just very benignly. Like, I had the weirdest dream last night, one person will say to the other. And I have an example in the book where I was alerted to the impact that something that I was saying was having on my husband because he shared a dream with me. This was a situation where we had moved to Little Rock and he had his own office, and there was a stack of boxes against the wall in that office that had not been unpacked for 5 years.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I walked in there one day and I said to him, if something happens to you, I'm just taking these boxes to the dump. Because obviously they're not important enough for you to even look and see what's in them.
Yeah.
Right.
And he was kind of like, okay. And that night, this was the dream that he had. The dream he had was that there had been a festival and there were all these special buildings that were built for the festival, and the bulldozers were coming to bulldoze them all down. And he was running around trying to find the mayor because he felt that the buildings could be repurposed for something, and it was a waste to just bulldoze them down. But he was just, he couldn't find the mayor, and it was just this terrible dream.
So how does that relate to what you
it's
said?
the boxes.
Well, so I was like, that's a really interesting dream. I was driving to work and I thought to myself, oh, this is what it felt like for him when I said, I'm just going to throw those boxes out.
So he put them away.
Well, I tell you what I did.
You threw them away.
No, I did not.
You bulldozed them.
I did something that was kind of sacrificial, but it was an act of love.
God, right.
Well, I sat with him as he unpacked them.
That's good.
Which was
That's
what he
good.
wanted.
Yeah.
So we sat there on Sunday afternoons.
You're the
and
mayor.
box by box, we
yeah.
kind of opened them up and he went through and he said, oh, this is this business thing that I did back in, 1975. And then he would tell me a story about that. I actually filmed some of them for posterity.
And then you throw them away.
So we threw about half the stuff away because there were things like, grocery circulars from
His
Oh,
high
Lord.
school report card.
things of that sort that we did not need to keep anymore. And he was willing to throw away. So we got about half of it thrown
That's
away.
great.
So we didn't even talk about dreams. That's in the last one. We talked a little bit about dreams, but dream work is so fun. If you have never done dream work, I highly recommend you do dream work. A lot of people think it's BS. I think it's wonderful. If you learn how to study it and you learn about your archetypes in the dream, it can be revealing to you.
And my first book, Negotiating the Inner Peace Treaty, is a great way to learn about dreams. And I just want to define archetypes for people.
Okay.
Because it's kind of a confusing word. It's a little bit in the lexicon now that, people hear it more. I actually heard it in a car commercial one day. But what an archetype is it's a system of energy that has a pattern to it that is pretty much recognizable across time and culture. So the archetype of the mother, the archetype of the hero, the archetype of the wise old man, the archetype of the child.
The oracle, the hero, the undertaker. I learned them all in literature class in high school. Yeah. The mother. There's all Star Wars is a really great film to watch and point out archetypes. Yeah.
George Lucas was a student of Jung.
Well, there you go.
And Jung was the one who introduced the term into the language.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
So it's really, it's not just a role, it's a whole system of energy.
Yeah.
It's like when you're in that, it's like when you talk about the inner critic. When we're in inner critic energy, we're in this kind of like boring down, mean, pound on either you or somebody else.
Myself.
Often yourself. Mm-hmm. And then when you're in the archetype of the poet or the free spirit, it's a totally different energy. Your body feels different. Your worldview is different. So that's the thing about archetypes.
Can you go through them all in one day, or do you do it as your life progresses, you change from things, or?
Well, so your profile would change over the course of a lifetime. And over the course of a day, you probably move in and out of several of them, depending on your roles. Or maybe, you're having a good day and then somebody calls you and yells at you and all of a sudden you feel like a little kid. So now you're in like a young person, young child archetype. And then you kind of snap out of it and you say, I'm going to go take on the world. So now you're in your kind of heroic.
So when we were talking about sexuality a minute ago, I remember your book had petals, and it had 3 types of, it was a lot about women, and it had 3 types of women's sexual roles. There was the seductress, the pleaser, the...
So let me go over those, because there were 4.
Oh, there were 4.
So there were 4 petals, and there was a bright side of that and a shadow side of that. In other words, if you are inherently a romantic, then you can become easily a wounded romantic or a demanding princess. Those are sort of like the shadow aspects of the romantic. The nurturer is what you're talking about. Nurturers tend to be pleasers. They want to take care of people. And sexual nurturers, there's ways of being a sexual nurturer where you're just like having duty sex, which is the shadow side. Or you can just be kind of like an earth mother, where you're just kind of warmly sharing your body, this experience with another person in a very earthy, grounded way. That's more of a positive aspect of the nurturer. The seductress can be very playful, very inviting, very evocative. She can also have a shadow side where you've got sex addiction, you've got the home wrecker, you've got somebody who's actually using sex for revenge. That aspect of it. And then you have the mystic, the element of it where for some people, sex is a kind of a meditation. It's an element of their spirituality. The dark side of that is if you're like so pure, you can't engage in anything earthly. So you're of no earthly good, and you abjure all sexuality because it's, you're so holy that you can't even imagine engaging in anything that would be that earthy, that embodied.
Having loved talking to you, we're going to wrap it up with one we've already talked about. It's the last chapter, and it's the one we all want to get to. And you've already talked about it twice, and I'm going to have you say it again. It's the soulful relationship that you get to through
the Labyrinth of Love.
Well, there you go. And through listening deeply, caring about the other person. What we're listening deeply.
So doing your personal work, begin within, do your personal work, get clear about who you are, and start co-creating a relationship with another human being who is a different person than you. And probably not who you expected them to be at the very start.
You've got a workshop coming up that's affordable to a lot of people. Tell us when the workshop is.
So the workshop is the Luminous Woman Weekend. It's a women's exploration weekend where we get to look at our inner cast of characters and the archetypal energies we've inhabited, and look at dimensions of self that are waiting to be born and waiting to be integrated so that the life can be more full and fulfilling. So that's April 19th through 21st. You can find out more information about it on my website.
What's your website?
ChelseaWakefield.com.
And we'll put it on Arkansas Flag and Banner. We'll put it up
on the show page.
On the show page, yeah.
I also have a recorded program on that called Love Strategies for Stronger Relationships, which is a program you can purchase and go through with your partner.
Yes. You can't do the weekend, yeah.
Well, that's not the Luminous Woman Weekend, but that is a relationship oriented. So Love Strategies for Stronger Relationships is under programs. They've got the Luminous Woman, and they've got other things that I'm offering in terms of events.
And all of this is at chelseawakefield.com.
Yeah. And, or sign up for my mailing list.
How do you get your book?
You can purchase my book just about any place.
Really? Amazon?
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble's online, or you can order it at the bookstore. At your local bookstore, you can order it. By the way, one of the things that I have on my website is an evaluation of your 6 love capacities.
Ooh.
So when you sign up for my newsletter, you get to download that capacity evaluation, and you can say, well, how am I doing?
Cool. Oh, we need to sign up for the newsletter. How often do you do? Once a month?
Well, that's permanently up there. But I also, if you sign up for, you're talking about my newsletter. So my newsletter comes out about once a month. It's called Leaning into Love. And I usually have a topic, and often I record a little video to share about like some little golden nugget about how to lean into love.
Everybody needs to do that. Go sign up for Chelsea's newsletter at chelseawakefield.com. Take her little test. The 6 love, what'd you call it? The 6
love capacities to see some questions. How are you doing?
I think that's great.
Yeah.
I always love talking to you. We could talk forever. Thank you for all the work you do, really and truly. It is so fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're so motivated. It's your mission. So Sun Gray picked this out for you. Tell her why you picked this out for her as your gift.
We've already given Chelsea a desk set because you've been here before. So you don't need more flags on your desk. But, since you're like, a relationship and sex therapist, I thought like a little reusable shopping bag.
Don't take that open. She'll never get it back in there.
Oh, you don't want to? Okay. So it's a reusable shopping bag that you can fold back up and put back in the zipper if you would like.
Supposedly.
Yes, supposedly. And, since you're a couples therapist, I thought Birds and the Bees,
great.
has a little bee on it.
I love it. Thank you so much.
I love one of those. Grace has got a handle. I can hang it on something in my car and take it in there.
It's super convenient.
Great.
I like it a lot.
Birds and the Bees. Very good. To our listeners, this show was recorded in the historical Taborian Hall in downtown Little Rock, Arkansas, and made possible by the good works of flagandbanner.com, Mr. Tom Wood, our audio engineer, Mr. Jonathan Hankins, our videographer, daughter, Miss Megan Pittman, production manager, and my co-host, Grady McCoy IV, Sun Gray. We would like to thank you for spending time with us. We hope you've heard or learned something that's been inspiring or enlightening, and I'm sure you have. And that whatever it is, will help you up your business, your independence, your love life, and all of your life. I'm Kerry McCoy, and I'll see you next time on Up in Your Business. Until then, be brave and keep it up.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. For more of Kerry's interviews, click on either video on the right of the screen. And as always, thank you for watching.